Hello and welcome back to the Neon Fields album launch event, or if this is the first video you're seeing, then welcome. If you haven't seen the first video, it's about Past, which is the intro track on the album. Definitely go check that one out, it's the first one in the series. And to anyone that's watched the past videos, thank you so much for your kind words and feedback. It was amazing to hear that some people felt inspired by it, learned a bit about audio production, or just enjoyed finding a little bit more about it, but it certainly made it all worth it doing these videos, and it's a huge encouragement, so thank you very, very much. Today we're talking about Rituals, the second track on the album. Rituals is quite an important one for us. It's actually where we got the name for the band, the concept behind the album as well. So it kicked a lot of things off. Ed's going to go into what the lyrics are about and a bit about how he wrote the song. He's also going to go into what demo it was originally based on. You'll find that with a few songs on the album, they're actually based off demos that Ed did before meeting me or Luke, and we're going to play those original ones both on the landing page, and also we're going to put a snippet in these videos as well, so you can hear where these songs originated. I'm going to come back shortly and talk about the production from the instrumental side of things, again like I did with Past, and then Luke's going to bring in a bit more about the percussion. Enjoy listening to Ed, and I will see you in a bit.
So the journey that began with Paths has now led us to Rituals, and the story of the album hinges on this track. A beautiful phenomenon has begun occurring where certain fields are glowing with radiant light. As word spreads, thousands gather to witness this miracle. In an imperfect world, they give life new meaning, and people's hope begins to heal. With no explanation of the cause, the focus shifted instead to how they made people feel, the togetherness they inspired. There were some that craved answers, and the decision was made to dig up the fields to determine what the cause was. It turned out the explanation was simple. It wasn't some miracle at all. The magic was lost, and they actually simply stopped happening altogether. Rituals actually came from a demo I wrote before starting the band called All I Need. The recognisable parts that have been carried forward are the vocal melodies, the verse and the chorus. When writing the demos, I did maybe 8 or 9 fully worked through demos before starting to find musicians to form a band with and develop these songs and write new ones. And I always saw them as sketches and ideas to be later developed. I never saw them as the finished article, and looked forward to finding real musicians, which I don't consider myself to be, in order to push them forward as into professional tracks. And I was very fortunate to find Piers and Luke, who are incredibly talented, both at the instruments they play, but also just creatively, both geniuses. So that is very helpful. It was a joy that the songs were helpful. I was pretty open-minded to how they developed. We wrote Rituals around the same time as trying to arrive at a band name. We'd originally called ourselves Cage of Lions after another demo I'd written, but as we developed our sound, it became pretty clear that that wasn't really an appropriate name for the band. It was a bit too, I guess, aggressive sounding for the music we were creating. One name I came up with was Unexplorer, and the idea behind the name was deliberately maintaining a childlike ignorance and simply enjoying something for what your imagination perceives it to be, rather than understand it and potentially the reality not being quite so magical. And when I googled Unexplorer, I found a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and really it was the same concept. The first 2 lines of the poem are, "A road ran past our house, too lovely to explore." And I really liked that idea behind the poem, kind of leave things be as they are and enjoy them for what they are, because investigating them could be the undoing of the magic that your imagination has created. As you know, we eventually arrived at the band name Neon Fields. We wanted the song Rituals to be the explanation for that name and be in line with this Unexplorer idea. Rituals is an extreme example of how our desire to understand was in fact our undoing, and that the positive effect that this miracle was having on society should have been protected and instead was destroyed. And it's this destruction that is then the catalyst for the unrest that echoes through the rest of our album, which is why, as I say, the story of the album hinges on this track. Anyway, I'll pass you over to Piers to talk you through the creation of the instrumental side of it.
So you've heard from Ed about what Rituals is about. Rituals has been floating around for quite a long time. It's one of our older songs that took a long time to actually get through the processing stage, which is a bit strange because it actually contains very, very few components, relatively speaking, versus something like Light Them Up or Collisions or Bleak or something along those lines. So I'm going to go over Rituals today. I've got quite an easy job because there's not a load to go over. Rituals starts off with this, I've named it sort of a bass bed. Actually goes through pretty much the entirety of the song. There are two layers of it. There's the sort of dry layer, there's actually two variants of this part, a dry one or a relatively dry one, and one that is quite heavily processed using granular synthesis. So I went over granular synthesis and how I enjoy using it in Pass. This is another example of that. The plugin is called Portal by Output. Really awesome effect that I use a ton. And I'll show you what it does here by sort of enabling the effects loop. So I've actually got two instances of Portal running. I can probably guess what the first one's going to be. It's going to be Grain Swells. Portal is jam-packed full of really good presets, which are just usable out the box. Some are really strange and are fantastic for sort of mangling your audio. Some are much more usable and much more subtle, but they're all really easy to go into and play with. They look fantastic as well, so they look like you know, a bit of a sandbox that you want to go and actually use. So you can see some of the effects here which is happening, like this yellow line here is something I drew in, and that will affect the dry to wet mix. So you can see as this triggers, I'll start it at the low point. You can see it ramping up at that, and you can also see this red line here is affecting those other sort of celestial type noises. And you can go into this one here and you can map certain parameters to this wheel. So that's the foundation for Rituals, is that sound going pretty much all the way throughout. There's a couple of other low end stuff which is just there for texture, so super low. And one of the latest additions we made when Jack came back with his first mix. Jack, probably this was the most transformative song when it came to me exporting stems and Jack exporting a bounce, which is like a first review before it's mastered of his mix. Jack put so much more energy into this song, and initially when I heard it I was really taken aback. I didn't think that it was the right mood. I thought this one was really low key, but Jack in the end convinced me that this was the way to go forward, and I'm really pleased he did, because he was right. And he, you know, but to me initially it sounded more like a disco or a dance track. And that's sort of what it is, in my opinion. So I was really pleased he managed to turn me around on that one. And I made a few additions post his first mix, which emphasised that style, including this ARP here. Wouldn't be out of place sort of with some 90s EDM music that I enjoyed listening to. So that's sort of the low end. It's really, really simple. There's 3 stems in the low end. Apart from that, there's a few stuff I did with vocal samples which I quite enjoyed, which became indistinguishable as vocal samples and became more instrument esque, I suppose. So this one you'll be familiar with if you've heard the song. My favourite thing about this song is that we had a guest vocalist, a friend of mine called Yuka, who's an incredible singer. We sent her this track and asked her if she would sing over it, and she did an absolutely amazing job. And she did two things for us. She did what we asked her to sing, which was the backing vocals that Ed also sings in the finished track. It's these chants that are going on in the background that tied in with this story of people all knowing the words to this singular chant, and this was a spiritual gathering type thing. So you have...
Feel your pulse, we feel so free,
So that goes on throughout that first chorus that Yuka's involved in. And the other thing she did for us, which was really special, was essentially making up backing vocal melodies to go with this song, and they're really, really cool, and they made the song for me. I sample a lot of them live as well. In my opinion, they had to be in the set live, so I just sampled it on a pad or on a grid type system like this, where I'll have Yuka's voice basically programmed to some of these individual pads so I can play them live. So they sound like this. A bit later on there were some other sort of backing vocal melodies which we had no hand in whatsoever, and you could just sort of improvise them, and they sound amazing.
All the shadows cast, the voices jump the same. Remember when they came, we began to heal.
So yeah, super thankful for that. It was the first time we had collaborated with anyone, and she did an amazing job, and she's an awesome singer, so thank you very much, Yuka, for doing that for us. Other than that, there's only a few more things to discuss when it comes to rituals. I think the percussive element, this was one of those examples where I did the percussive loop before Luke was involved in the track. I spoke a little bit about how Luke and I work together, and how Luke is one of the favourite drummer I've worked with, because he's so compassionate to parts that I include in there that I enjoy, and I hope he thinks the same thing in terms of me not writing too many drums. But this was an example of me putting in some percussion before sending it to Luke. So it's just a kick, snare, loads of delay, and that's there pretty much for the entirety of the song after it kicks in, apart from a couple of breaks here and there. And then Luke does acoustic drums over the top of it, which I think sound great as well. So just another example of Luke sort of leaving room for some of my ideas, which I was really, really pleased with. The other thing I briefly wanted to discuss with this was this ties section. I've always wanted to apply more effects to Ed's vocals, not because he sings poorly, because he does an amazing job, but because I enjoy effective vocals. I like a lot of bands like Moderat, Grimes, who all have a lot of processed vocals in there. It's a really small section, but I was quite pleased how it came out. It's linked to this effect here, so another example of Portal and Thermal, which is another plugin from Output, but this one's more distortion based. It's like a multi-layered, multi-voicing harmonic distortion plugin. Kind of similar layout. It was released after Portal, and I think that it got a little bit more refined. I don't use it as frequently, but again, it's really, really great, and it's got this beautiful interface that just makes you want to play with it. So here's how I affected those vocals. And that worked quite nicely with these other samples from Yuka there. Another component of rituals I almost forgot to speak about is the synth hook that's in at the end. So this one here. The first time I put this in, I thought it really worked, and I thought it really, really suited the song, but I thought it took it away from the other tracks sort of the more darker, moody type stuff that we were writing at the time. So I was quite concerned about putting this in, but I thought it sounded great, and I thought we could kind of tone it down. In the end, the opposite thing happened. So Jack took it, and as I described earlier, Jack took this song into a completely different area for me and made it into a much more energetic sort of dance track, which again I'm really pleased he did, and he really brought this part to the forefront. Funny enough, this sample used to pretty much go through the first chorus, the intro, the pre-chorus and the last chorus, so it was featured in probably about 75% of the song. But Jack sent me a bounce to review on one occasion, and he forgot to unmute it before processing a WAV for me to listen to. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. He's taken out the main ARP, which I thought was a strange choice. But the more I listened, the more I kind of thought, yeah, no, that really worked. But it needs to come in at the end. So I called Jack and I said to him, you know, I really love that you've taken it out, but I think it needs to feature in there a little bit. And he said he's got no idea what I'm talking about, and it was a complete mistake. We then just put it back in toward the end. So yeah, it was another one of those lucky mistakes with Rituals, which I was very pleased about. And there's just two versions of this. There is the dry version, and then there's the much more sort of granularized. That's all I've really got to talk about with Rituals. I hope, again, you found that interesting. If there's anything else you'd like to know from me, just let me know in the comment section. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking more in the third instalment. Cheers.
Hey everyone, so let's take a look at the drums for Rituals. Slight confession before we start, I don't actually have the original Ableton session on this machine. There's a reason for that, and there's kind of a story to it. So I figured what I would do is kind of explain that story, talk through the process, and then we can have a look at this Ableton session, which is our live Ableton session. So this handles the drums, the samples, the playback, all of that kind of stuff. It's kind of like the main brain for our live performance. But before we get into that, let's talk about Rituals. As Piers has probably explained, before he brought this song to us, he had released it under a solo project. I had a hard time because when this was initially brought to me, it was such an atmospheric, kind of chilled, like, it was like almost like an orchestral piece, and it didn't sound like it needed my drums. This is like a fairly common theme and something that I'm typically able to get past after looking at it and thinking about it and trying out some different things. Rituals, I just really struggled. And at no point did I find anything better than the drums that he had already, which was essentially I've got it here, the kick and snare, that already existed in the song. That came from Piers, and I was just like, there's nothing I can add to this. Like, you've already got what you need there. It wasn't until this sort of 80s new wave synth peaked out a little bit, and I just kind of got the idea of, well, maybe I should just, keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things. This was the first track where the drums were just purely programmed. I didn't need to play them in. Like, it was kind of meant to just sound like a drum machine. I still used my acoustic sounds, or the acoustic sounds I was using at the time from Superior Drummer, but it got layered. The hi-hats, I think, were more like of an electronic hi-hat as opposed to the acoustic ones that come with. And yeah, it ended up just going from there. I do remember there was one element that I put in that ended up staying. I can't remember why or when I put it in. It might have even been in a rehearsal. But it's this. It started off as a sample that was on my SPD.
An SBD is a sampling pad that often features a series of individual pads that can be programmed to play samples when hit. It's a great solution to play back our electronic samples live in more compact venues.
So when we started playing it, I think this is after I programmed the drums and we started trying to play it live, and I was just playing it on an SBD. And for some reason, I just found that one like bell sample, which when it came to actually producing the track, initially didn't feel like I had a place for, but I ended up playing around with it and then put a reverse on there and tried to mash them up together. And it came out with that, and actually, in the context of the track, I love it. And so, yeah, this is the first, it's not first and only, but the first song where programming drums just seem to be the better option. That's why it lends itself towards that, like, 80s new wave type sound, which we all absolutely love, and I think a lot of people seem to like this song because of it. Moving on to the playback session, I just thought this would be a good time to actually show people through how we're able to perform live, because if you've listened to the music and you know there's only 3 of us, it's not an easy feat. So obviously there is an element of backing tracks involved. Everything we play live, so you won't ever see us miming anything. I hope that much is obvious, but we use these tracks to basically fill in the space. And so, for example, most of the bass stuff you will hear is on track because we don't have a bass player. And then the synth stuff, whilst Piers is playing a lot of the lead stuff, or the stuff that helps you identify the song, things that stand out. There's a lot of synth. We're a very synth heavy band, so we have to put a fair amount of it on track. Where it gets interesting for me is the drums. So I play an electronic drum kit, and I try to play as much of the song as I can, even when it's stuff like Rituals, where we have these samples. Essentially, what I do is I split up the drum MIDI to go into different plugins, and then Ableton basically just automates what I'm playing. One of my drums at one moment can be like a snare drum, and the next moment it's a sample that's specific to that song. So if I show you a little example, so if I hit the verse here, this is I can't play it that well in time because I'm playing with a mouse, but you get the idea. And then when we go to the chorus, this gains. I'll pause so you can actually hear it. It's got a Lindrum kind of 80s snare sound that gets layered on top. And of course, the other thing that happens is that the acoustic sounds, which all come through here, in fact, you can watch it happening. It flips from blank, which is no sound at all, to the acoustic kit. And so that's when the rest of my drums all kind of activate and I'm able to play them. So that's why if you're watching us live and it looks like I'm doing something random which you can't hear, it's because I'm not playing acoustic drums, I'm playing samples or whatever is specific to that song. And the fun thing about that is that you can add effects and do all sorts of great automated things because it's all contained within this session. So once you hit play, the automation just knows where it is. So you can do things like adding automated reverbs or fading stuff out by filtering it and doing all sorts of fun stuff, which is something I actually do in this song. So if I go back to the samples and go along to the very end, somewhere, I presume here we go, there's a filter, and yeah, you can see it working. So if I just spam the snare a lot, there you go, you can hear it kind of doing its own thing. And when I'm playing live, you don't notice it's happening. It just sounds natural because it's what happens in the song. But it's a great way of utilizing all of these powerful tools into a live performance. I think, without nerding out too much, that's where I'll leave it there. I mean, there is so much more to go into when it comes to the live playback session, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a taste now, kind of at the start of the journey, so that when we come back to it in certain areas, it might at least make a little bit of sense. But if you want to know more about this, just let me know. I'm happy to run through all of the mad, over-the-top, geeky stuff that's going on in this session. Right. Yeah, I think that covers it for now. So thanks, everyone. And I'll catch you on Bleak.